Hello and welcome to another episode of the School of Innovation. I'm your host Yaniv Korem, and today we are talking about how to build a corporate academy. I'm joined by my good friend and mentor, Leonard Lane. Leonard serves as a member of the board at Fung Academy and advisor to the group chairman at Leonard Fung. He is also a professor at the Paul Merage School of Business at the University of California, Irvine, where he teaches competitive strategy, global strategy, competitive intelligence, and strategic innovation. I did not know this about Leonard, but he is also a 3-time Ironman finisher. So, let's get right into the episode. Hi, Leonard. Welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time today to talk to us. Today's episode is about corporate academies. We want to know what is a corporate academy, why you want to maybe start one, and if you did, how would you go about doing that? And I just want to dive into it, right? What is a corporate academy?
Well, Yaniv, in contrast to public education and in contrast to a university, a corporate academy is a company-specific development, and I'm going to call it an institute. It can also be considered a central educational hub, but it's basically the strategic instrument for the organization. Go beyond training. It's to basically accelerate learning. And its primary purpose is to make a translation of the strategy of the organization to development and capability building initiatives that are relevant to the employees of the organization and to the company as a whole. We take a look at it in the Fung Group as a strategic function, and that's the way we started it. It was really aimed at the integration of the development of our leadership as individuals and their performance as team members, and finally, as a way to accelerate learning and create learning as a competitive advantage across the entire organization.
Right. And so that's super interesting. Like, what was the decision-making process that got you to say, okay, we need a corporate academy?
The process was really interesting. We made a determination that going into 2010, 11, 12, when we started the academy, and we were looking forward into the next 20 years, and we determined in that strategic view that the key capability of an organization like ours that is part of a network, that network had to have learning at its heart. And that we also determined that the networks that were going to win as we moved into this age of digitization and platforms were going to be the networks that learn fastest. Once we determined that, we then took a step backwards and said, so how do we first of all build a learning organization ourselves? And then secondly, how do we translate those learnings into the other players in our network? And as you'll recall, one of the largest parts of the Fung Group is Leonard Fung, which is our trading arm. And we are classified as a network orchestrator because we are form a middleman that takes orders from our customers in the West and for apparel, shoes, and accessories, and goes and looks for the best factory locations across Asia to produce those particular items, and we ship those back to the West. We are an asset-light model. We do not own any factories, and so consequently, being in this network between customers and vendors, if we can help the customers understand how to improve their own processes, and then work with the vendors to be able to learn all the new tools that are brought about by the switch from an analog to a digital world at exponential speed. If we can be the orchestrator in the middle of that, we can create a tremendous amount of value, and that means we can capture it as part of our business model. So that was our thinking. It was basically how to accelerate learning inside the organization and to be able to translate that learning to our partners in our ecosystem.
Okay. So give us a sense of what happens within the Fung Academy. How is it structured, and what's the, let's say, day-to-day activities, and if there is such a thing as a typical day?
Well, let me start with, first of all, some context as to how we get to what a typical day begins to look like. we took a look at the academy and said that we needed to have what I call the following characteristics. It needed to have a very clear strategic focus, and it needed to be managed from our perspective as a separate business entity. It could be measured by the way that it created value. And the strategic focus really helped us open up what we call possibilities for leadership, creativity, and problem solving potential in the organization. And those are all key elements of what we determined to be a learning organization. The second thing, besides the strategic focus, is we are a execution-focused company. And it's sometimes difficult when you're fighting the battle, so to speak, every day with a complex organization such as ours, how to maintain a look either around the corner or over the hill. We wanted to make sure that the Academy, besides having a strategic focus, would be able to provide a contribution to the translation of the vision of the organization, move that all the way down to work processes. Probably more important, we wanted the Academy to be the enabler to carry out large-scale change initiatives and strategic projects across the business. And by having this strategic focus and being managed as a separate entity, we could build the trust of the organization that we could help them create their own competitive advantage. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that we were really well focused on the company and the competitive environment that we were working in. And so we were not only looking over the horizon and around the corner, also wanted to build up very unique sets of knowledge exclusively within the organization that would give the organization as a whole a competitive advantage. Then we had one more piece of context that fit into that. We're a Hong Kong-based multinational organization, and we produce in the East and we ship to the West. But we also began looking at how the demographics in the world were changing. And we were looking at one figure in particular, and that was that there would be 3.8 billion new consumers by the year 2038 that would be out of Asia. And the fact that we were now focused on a market in the West, we were going to need to pivot to focusing on the markets in the East so that we, in fact, would both produce and sell into those markets. Once we made that decision, we faced another challenge. And the other challenge was we had to put ourselves in a position to compete for talent in Asia. And in order to do that, we had to be able to offer people basically global leadership development is a mandate that we needed to build into the Academy. And I'll come back to how we did that as in your question of our day-to-day. And the second big challenge we had was it wasn't just the top management in the company, it was going to be the middle management. And how did we get them prepared for this dramatically changing world? And then finally, we also determined that public education was not giving us people that had the specific kinds of global thinking and global leadership and global talent that we needed. So we needed to put all of that together into the company. I come back within that context. We also add one more word here. We took a look at the world we were in, which was very volatile, pretty uncertain, very complex, and getting more ambiguous by the day. And we asked ourselves, what do we need to do to understand what are really causing the disturbances on the surface? And we put ourselves in a position of a whitewater kayaker. You go through the rapids, you have to not only be able to read what's on the surface, you also have to be able to understand what's beneath the surface and what causes those disturbances. And so we put all of that together and said, we need to build an organization that prepares leaders to be able to be the captain navigator in this world. And that brought us all the way down to how we started the Academy. Those were the philosophies behind it. And then it gets you down to what we do, what we did and what we do. And so what we did is we started with leadership. We started with our top 342 people in the organization. We designed a very unique custom program that we did with MIT. And we had a 2-week program to introduce leaders to this whitewater volatile world, and also gave them a chance to learn how to work together in some very different ways across both internal and external boundaries. We followed that up with the second point that said we have to talk to our middle managers. So we developed a unique 1-week program really focused on supply chain management, which is our core capability in the company, for our next 1,000 people. And that was delivered by Stanford for us. And we had Stanford faculty come to Hong Kong over the course of a year and ran these week-long programs. So by the time we finished the first 2.5 years in the academy, we had basically taken our top almost 1,500 leaders, taking them through a series of learning activities that were beyond just the general learning and development activities, but activities that were preparing them to be able to be the captain navigator in this whitewater world with the unique skills of our business, which is producing apparel, shoes, and accessories for customers in both the West and in Europe.
So I want to touch on a couple of things that you said. The first one is about the structure. You said that you wanted to structure the academy as a separate entity. I kind of get that, and I kind of get the pros behind that of, having flexibility and identity and all of that. But it also introduces difficulty in influencing the business. The academy is sort of a different animal, right? And it doesn't really, and correct me if I'm wrong, have any influence over the business units. And yet it needs to influence them in order to get the business to go in a certain direction. So I wonder if you could say a few words about how to do that, or how did you overcome those challenges?
That's a really good question. And that was one of the major challenges that we had when we started the academy. We wanted to keep it separate because, as quite a number of people in your audience will know, when organizations start to have cutbacks in their budgets and in their people, and when markets turn around, one of the first things that gets cut is learning and development, but particularly training. Training and development budgets are usually one of the first things to go. We determined that we needed to be a learning organization, and that learning needed to be a competitive advantage for us. We had to put the organization in a position that the normal business operating budgets that a typical training and development group would have would not be in a position to be cut. So we put it at the corporate level. We call it the 1937 level. We are part of that corporate groups, what we refer to as a parenting advantage. By having us at the corporate group, we get the economies of scope, whereby we can provide our resources across the entire business, which makes us a lot more cost effective. The second thing was, a really core question was, how do we influence the business? What we determined is that in taking a look at the global companies, and we took a look at a lot of them before we set this up, that the influence that a learning and development group had basically needed to be supported from the top. And if that's supported from the top and it provides value, then the businesses will continue to use it. And so we report directly to the group chairman. And in our organization, you can't get any higher than that. And we also report to the chairman of each of the major public companies. So we have a dual reporting relationship, but it is at the top. The influence to the companies came down to being able to deliver value as perceived in their eyes. And so we spend a lot of time understanding what's happening in the marketplace, and that is both with our customers and with our vendors, and taking a look at the pain points that the businesses have, and address those in a very strategic and thoughtful way, and involve the business deeply in those projects so that they have ownership for them and then carry them out. Business then looks to us for the ability to solve a problem beyond the typical way that it may have been done in the past. We've introduced the concept of innovation and rapid prototyping into the tools we use to work with the business, all of which were introduced by the MIT and Stanford programs, and which were perceived as one of the most valuable contributions to individuals' development since the company's founding 115 years ago. So we have built off those experiences and continue to reinforce them on a day-to-day basis. And we measure ourselves also on on how the business is profiting from our work. So we can see when we started something in a form of almost a balanced scorecard, and we can see how it contributes to an objective and how that objective contributes to the profitability of the unit.
So it sounds like you're saying that a corporate academy is a cost center. My question is, Does it have to be a cost center, or can it turn into or become at some point a profit center? Or is it about how you measure your impact, right? Beyond P&L, so to speak.
Mhm. It's a journey, Yaniv. It starts as a cost center because that's an investment that's made by the company in its people in the
Mhm.
process of accelerating their learning and building their capabilities. As the academy evolves, and this is the way ours evolved, as the academy evolves, you begin sharing the cost with the business units. The
Okay.
simplest way is we run a corporate program with a major university around the world or with a major innovation center, and the businesses pay a portion of that cost. And then over time, as the academy got more into the innovation area, we began basically charging out the time of the academy to work with the business unit in the form of a consultant. And we're in the
Mhm.
process of moving that way now, but we've made a clear determination that a third of our cost, now that we've been in operation over 10 years, a third of our cost is what I call sort of the pure research, R&D, innovation, looking over the horizon and seeing what are the new things that we ought to be investing in to improve the capabilities and competitive advantage of our business. A third of our cost is borne directly by the business in terms of what they pay to go to programs. And, and we have an interesting way to bring them along in this area now. Part of our leaders' compensation package is
Mhm.
based on how many people they have ready now to go to the programs that we have for building capabilities for the future. So we link up their incentives to the development process. And then a third of the business is a shared piece, and that is we determine on a project by project basis where the opportunities for learning are, where the resources need to be deployed, and we work out with the business what the cost sharing opportunities would be.
So I guess if you're looking to build a corporate academy, and this is in very broad strokes, your strategy, so to speak, in the beginning has to be building a foundation, building a strong relationship with the businesses, and also providing that value. So when that sort of tipping point happens where you start, let's say, charging for the programs that you provide, they're okay with that.
And that becomes to them a normal investment, not a cost. And we were very careful with the way we word this. So this becomes a normal way of them thinking about the investments they need to make to help them gain competitive advantage. So we move from the word cost to investment.
Yeah.
And once we do that, then we have some different ways that we can start to measure what the return on that investment is over time. Um, Measuring those returns from an academy point of view is difficult, even for the top companies that are doing this. Apple, General Electric, Shell, Mars, IKEA, just to name a few, Unilever, all of them across the world. And we've modeled a lot of what we do with the leaders of those companies. We talk to them a lot. We share a lot of best practices, but every one of them is all facing the exact same question. How do we measure the value that we create, that we help create? So it's a challenge, and
Yeah.
it's just one that's not going to go away. And there's not a silver bullet for an answer. But all the things that I've talked about are all going into an ongoing discussion. But once we got the discussion over to capabilities and investment, and we've kept basically our strategic focus. Then it becomes a very positive discussion we have with our business leaders on an ongoing basis.
Changing that frame or reframing the conversation as investment versus cost, I guess in a different space, right, where they used to generally talk about P&L. Now it's about growth and investment, and I think that's a super interesting point.
When we stick with that a lot, because when people ask me quite often, what's one of the advantages of a corporate academy? One of the big advantages for us is, besides the employee involvement with it, is really this whole issue the importance for the growth of the company. People really see the need for transferring the vision and objectives into building capabilities.
Now, you talked about the programs, the ones that you collaborated with MIT and Stanford. Could you give us a feel or a sense of what happens in these programs?
Both of the programs were a little bit unique compared to a lot of corporate programs that are run by both of the schools. And the executive education parts of those business schools are global. They're very, very well known. We've also, by the way, talked to people. We spend time also with INSEAD, the London School of Economics. So we work with a number of organizations around the world. But MIT and Stanford were a bit unique. The MIT program, we were looking to introduce basically 300, and let me round the number up, it was 342, about 350 people by the time we finished. We wanted to introduce that group of people to each other in a non-business environment, basically in a learning environment, because their transactions with each other were all around business. And that limited them into terms of the way they could look at the context of the world. So the MIT program for us was not so much a content program as it was a context building program. And what I mean by context building, we spent a lot of time in that program helping people understand how the forces, the global forces around political, economic, social, technical, environmental, legal, how those forces were changing our industry. And we wanted to make them conversant with those forces so they could have a much more strategic discussion amongst themselves and with our customers. The second thing we did is we did a pretty extensive job working with MIT and taking a look at the capabilities we needed to build in our leaders to be able to make the switch from context to content, but understand how content was driven by this context. And we developed a series of exercises that introduced them and projects that introduced them to dealing with the context, the big problems they had in content, linking them to how context was affecting them, and then putting a project together to be able to work that out. For an example, when we started the program, we were just beginning the understanding as the world was going to move from analog to digital. In doing that, that opened up for us the opportunities to say, how can we start to use these new digital tools? In particular, let me think about customer satisfaction, customer behavior, predictive analytics. How could we use those tools to do a much better job of understanding what was driving our own customers' behavior? So we wanted to know, for example, what's going on with the consumer markets in the United States. We don't sell directly to consumers, we sell directly to the businesses. We could understand what was driving all the changes in consumer behavior and therefore driving the changes in what our business-to-business customers needed to change. We, in fact, could then figure out better delivery mechanisms. So that whole MIT program was helping people understand how to have that conversation. And then the Stanford program said we need to get one level down. They said, now that we have the conversation, how do we adapt our processes to deliver this? And so the supply chain program with Stanford, or the Stanford program, was more than anything else focused on how to optimize our supply chains and what companies around the world were doing to deal with the switch that was coming from analog to digital. Then we did one more thing, Yaniv. We also understood that this move from analog to digital was really going to be rapid. And so we wanted a really good, hard look into what that world might look like. And so we went to Singularity University and we actually brought them out to Hong Kong. Took roughly between 300 and 400 of our people through a 3-day program with Singularity that took a look at what was the potential impact of this exponential increase in computing power. So we used MIT to start a conversation. We use Stanford to say, how do I make the conversation work with our business processes? And we now use Singularity to say, how is the world changing? So the S-curves, which used to be 20 and 30 years between them, are now 12 to 18 months. How do we make all that work?
Yeah. Quick follow-up for all these programs. Was it sort of a retreat format? Were they just focusing on the attendees, just focused on the programs, or were they trying to basically balance between managing the business or the day-to-day and the program?
All three of the programs were off-site.
Offsite.
MIT, we took them, we took the first group to Boston for a week, and then we had a space in between the first week and the second week where they worked on projects. And then the second week was all held out at Hong Kong University. And the Stanford program, we happened to have our own learning space inside one of our buildings in Hong Kong. And so they went into that learning space and they spent a week there completely separated in all these cases from the business. And then for the Singularity, we took everybody off site for 3 days again.
And do you think that made a difference? Do you think that's a requirement when building these programs, that sort of separation?
We believe it is, and there's quite a bit of a debate back and forth. But I think when you finally talk to enough people, they say you got to get them out of their business environment, get them away from their mobile phones. You got to get them away from secretaries coming down and pulling them out. You have to get them focused on what we're there to do, which is to basically accelerate their learning and build their capabilities.
So what I want to do now is try to focus on the how-tos. You convinced me, Leonard. I'm convinced. I want to start a corporate academy. And I want to kind of pick your brain about how to go about doing that.
Well, the first thing is go talk to your chairman. Okay, this thing needs to be driven from the top. The one thing we learn in talking to people around the world is don't attempt it from the middle. The second thing is don't attempt it out of the learning and development group. And my colleagues in that area will, of course, argue with me, and we've argued publicly around the world in forums about this. Our chairman, Victor Fung, who is a firm believer in learning as a capability that needs to be part of every manager's toolkit. We call them, or refer to them, we say we want a company full of exponential learners. As you go to the top. The second thing is you make a really good business case for it. And that is what we did, is we went to the top and we, as I said earlier, our big issue to really make sure we had this thing right was to start it off with a strategic focus. This was not something that was nice to have. It was something that basically was going to be critical to our survival. And so with the chairman, we built that case. Once we made that determination, and then we put it into the three parts. We started with, I want to call it leadership development, because that was where the immediate need was, and that was where we could start to change people's behaviors. And then we went to a second piece. We had programs to prove out our theories. So we made a number of hypotheses going in, built a good business case for that. We had the chairman, the support of the chairman, the support of the operating presidents of each of our companies. The fact that our chairman was saying, this is going to be a part of the way we run our business into the future, and I'm going to make this investment. So we basically, at 1937 level, the corporate level, we made the initial investment to send everyone that went to Stanford, MIT, and Singularity.
Wow.
That showed a commitment at the top. So that's my first step, commitment at the top. The second thing is make sure it has a strategic focus that is really points out how it is going to help the business achieve its strategic objectives. The third part was make sure that we stay visionary. We are focused on the work we do on, we call it the large-scale transformation and change initiatives. And then thirdly, or the final point, is to make sure that we are really company specific in the capabilities we're building, so people can see this is not some pie in the sky thing. This is something I need to be a part of if I'm going to get ahead with my own career, and if with my team and with my whole business unit, if we're going to get ahead in the marketplace, and we need to be a part of this. So it was really building that influence broadly, and then literally down project by project.
Well, I guess people skills are involved in this, and you mentioned people a lot when you talk about the academy. I wonder how you hire, how do you find talent to run the academy? Where do you find these people? Is it within the organization, outside, both?
We did it, I'm not going to say kind of uniquely. We did not start out of a learning and development group. My own background is I'm a supply chain guy and a strategy guy. I have next to no formal learning and development background, even though I have a doctorate in management as well as an MBA. But I am not a traditional learning and development person. Because of that, we started from the business point of view. And when Victor brought me back to Hong Kong to put the academy together, he said, my first question to him was, I said, why do you have me here? How come you don't have a learning and development person? He said, because I want the academy to be a business-driven, strategic focused group. Therefore, I want to start with somebody that understands what our business is. Once we made that decision, we then said, okay, underneath the structure we needed to build underneath it in order to maintain our strategic focus was people that were not traditional learning and development people, but what we call out at the edge, in terms of how you think about, let's call it the whitewater kayaker and the entrepreneurial learner, people with imagination. And so we reached way beyond any learning and development piece. We went out to people like the Deloitte Center for the Edge. We went out to people like John Seeley Brown and John Hagel. We went to some really interesting people at Bertelsmann. We went to some really interesting people at General Electric. We went to some super interesting people at IKEA, helping drive the process of learning in those businesses. That's how we began. Rather than staff inside, we went outside and just found really interesting people. The Fung Group is known as a network orchestrator. We're just going to follow the same model. We, in fact, are going to go out and build a network of people rather than staff heavily in the academy. And so we built networks of people that help us think through our problems, and then we find organizations that can help us deliver on whatever type of learning activities we need. So we've been relatively asset light, so to speak. In terms of the learning and development side, we really only have, I think, 4 people in the academy technically in that area, a couple of program developers and a couple of people that are really good at just managing an ecosystem. Find a lot of other people to deliver what we need. But we got into a couple of other areas, and one was really interesting is we determined that speed was one variable that we needed to be, or one imperative we needed to be on top of, but we also needed to have something around innovation because we were not, by our own perception, innovating fast enough. We went out and hired the leader of the IDEO Shanghai office and asked him to bring his network inside. We'd never had anybody like this inside the organization, and we call that person a fire starter, and he carries the title of Chief Catalyst for us. We basically said, hire a small team, but really only bring in contractors as you need them. We want you to bring in the power of your network to help our businesses. And that's how we've grown the academy. We've been pretty asset light. We believe in harnessing a network, and we believe in going out and getting really interesting people to work with us.
How do you, I guess, pass on the knowledge, right? Because you've got these networks and people flowing in and out of it, and no one's really staying in place. So there's a lot of flow in and out. How do you preserve the knowledge and basically pass it on, make sure you don't lose it?
That's been a challenge for us. Now with kind of the world being digitized, we are doing a little bit better job of capturing that knowledge. The hypothesis that we started with was the knowledge would be provided to the people in the business, to our business folks, and they were going to use that knowledge in the everyday work they did. That knowledge would become part of their everyday lives. And we watch that work, and we're fairly happy with it because we've taught people a lot of skills on how to utilize this knowledge, put that knowledge to work in projects, kind of a learn by doing process and putting knowledge into the flow of work. But we haven't captured it. I mean, there's not a book that's written about it. And we're still debating about better ways to capture it. Basically finding that making people responsible for their own learning is probably one of the best ways we can do it in an organization like ours.
It's definitely, I think, a unique approach to, knowledge management. Kind of reminds me of the Facebook data model versus the Snapchat data model, where stuff used to disappear in Snapchat after you posted something, 24 hours, and then it would disappear. I think there's something here that could sort of be a metaphor to what you guys are doing, where you're saying the knowledge only matters in the service of the business. And once it's done that, then it no longer needs to basically be here. We don't need to keep it. It's there. It's in action. It's in the business.
Yeah, we call it just putting knowledge into the flow of work. The other thing that we're experimenting with is this is in a form like an apprentice program. And we're really fascinated by the whole concept of the apprentice process and both mentoring and reverse mentoring and how all that comes together. We've been fairly happy with the concept of putting learning into the flow of work and knowledge into the flow of work, but basically helping our managers learn to do a better job of mentoring and helping our people learn to do a better job of being an apprentice.
And is there a program for that, or is it just something that happens on a day-to-day basis?
So far, it's been a day-to-day basis, but we've certainly seen over the last couple of years a need to formalize that, not only from a mentoring standpoint, but probably even more important from reverse mentoring. Because as we jokingly refer to, the kids know all about the digital side of the business and the adults know all about the analog side, but we got to learn really from the kids. So the leader becomes the new apprentice, and we've not quite figured out the best way to do that, but it is on our agenda to experiment with in a big way in 2020.
I want to ask you one last question about the future. What's next for Fung Academy, or maybe on a broader scale, what's next for corporate academies in general?
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts. We're still thinking this through. I'm working closely with, as I mentioned, with John Seely Brown, with Stanford, with MIT, with a number of other really interesting groups of people, and we're trying to work now on what are the real capabilities you need to build for this whitewater world, and along with that, you also have to recognize that strategies are doing a better job of dealing with this, but organizational designs are way behind. What I see kind of next for us is really building up what the capabilities are of the whitewater world, beginning to describe these in a very action-oriented way, but also helping organizations think through how they need to redesign the way they operate in order to take into account the volatility, the speed, the complexity, and the new capabilities we're developing, and the structures are just way behind. So I think one of the next roles of the Academy is to help organizations think about and build the new capabilities, but also contribute to the way the structures are put together to optimize that learning. I'm going to reference a book that John Seely Brown and Ann Pendleton Julian wrote, just finished, called Design Unbound. And we think the role for the Academy is to begin looking at those principles so that we're dealing not only with context, but also taking a look at helping companies deal with problems that are not just in the world, but problems that are on the world. I think the next role for academies is moving beyond company specific to be able to build their organizations to be able to address some of the larger issues in society.
Great. So I'm going to link the Design Unbound book in the show notes. If any of our listeners want to connect with you, what would be the best way?
The best way is through my affiliation with the University of California, Irvine. So they can connect with me at llane@uci.edu.
Perfect. And I'll link that as well in the show notes. Leonard, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'm glad we had the opportunity to join you, and I look forward to seeing you when I'm in Israel next.
That's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Leonard Lane. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next week.